Chapter 2 of Adventures with a Little Girl with Big Ideas. Chapter 2, Becoming Alice in Wonderland. Hanging on to positive thoughts, trying to stand tall in my 3-inch high heels, I replayed in my mind the words of my Chinese classmate. No need to worry, she had reassured me. Helen will find you. I should have realized that I was a Waldo in any Hong Kong crowd. Sure enough, Helen Kwok greeted me. Then with great efficiency, she took charge of me, grabbing my small suitcase and declaring, "We have to hurry, we have to hurry." From the lingering sleepy effects of the Dramamine, I felt like Alice in Wonderland, having just fallen to the other side of the world with so many wondrous things to see. Helen seemed like the Alice's white rabbit in a rush to a very important date. In this case, she had to get to class. But first, she got me settled, promising that later she would show me around Hong Kong. From the airport, Helen took me directly to the women's high-rise dorm. On the way, in less than an hour's journey, the highlights of this gem of Hong Kong unfolded before me like a red carpet of welcome. Exiting Hong Kong's airport, located in the heart of the city on the mainland, or Kowloon side, we soon found ourselves in the midst of more people hustling about than I could ever imagine possible, more crowded than even New York City or Tokyo, each with a population over 10 million. But Hong Kong's population of 2 million at that time was squeezed into less space. Coming to the end of Kowloon's main thoroughfare, we arrived at the harbor. There, an expansive panoramic view opened to us at the pier to board the Star ferry boat to Hong Kong Island. More crowds on the ferry, yet it was a fun way to get to our destination that Helen pointed out. It was a tall building more than halfway up the mountain leading to Victoria Peak. The ferry boat seemed to spill out its passengers like a clumsy cook spilling a bowl of peas that scatter across the floor. Hong Kong Island seemed less crowded and newer. In front of us rose the stately Hilton Hotel, featuring an unusual shop that was to become my favorite in all of Hong Kong. No time to linger. Helen bustled me aboard the Victoria Peak tram. As we rose higher and higher on that mountainside, the views majestically expanded. This was better than the plane's aerial previews. As I wondered how much higher we would go, Helen grabbed my bag and my hand to hop off. Practically across the way from this stop, we entered the girls' dorm and took the lift to the 7th floor. Helen showed me my room, introduced me to an ayah, a Chinese maid, and raced off to her class. Lying back on the firm mattress, I was grateful for the nap time to let the jet lag and astonishment gently ebb away. That evening, over dinner, I learned that Helen was majoring in social work with a schedule that combined classroom studies with an internship. During the next 2 weeks, Helen took me along on her round of calls to recent Chinese refugees who were getting settled in cramped living spaces and even smaller workplaces, spots few tourists ever got to visit. Grateful for shelter and hope for the future, living in dismal 10 by 12-foot rooms, not one, but 2 multi-generational families, that is, 8 to 10 people, slept together on bunk beds against the walls with scant storage space for their minimal belongings in that makeshift building of about a dozen rooms. Ground floor toilets, sinks, and cooking space were shared by all families. By taking turns assisting one another with childcare, food preparations, etc., Each adult was able to work long hours at low wages so they could become more self-supporting in starting their lives anew and in a new language. While written pictographic characters have been the same throughout China for the past 2,000 years, spoken dialects are many. Cantonese was spoken in Hong Kong. However, refugees spoke other dialects, and ultimately, with the rise of China, now Mandarin dominates. These visits to refugee shelters and workplaces came with my own personal translator, Helen, and proved mutually beneficial since the artisans wanted to sell their craft. I not only could see and appreciate their talent and skill, but I could purchase treasures to mail back to my family in New York, along with an official certificate of origin, a requirement due to the U.S. boycott against anything from Communist China. British and American diplomat wives, along with businessmen's wives, operated a refugee handicraft store in the Hong Kong Hilton Hotel. Handicrafts were a misnomer because, although the treasures for sale were handcrafted, they were worthy of a Neiman Marcus department store given the highly skilled workmanship. On one of my last days in Hong Kong, with a green light from my mother in New York, I purchased everything I could imagine in that Hilton refugee handicraft shop that my parents, my sister, my favorite aunts, and I would like to have. Many hand-painted fine art on silk scrolls, black and gold brocade-trimmed cashmere sweaters, ivory statues, on and on. Fearing the shock of the tally as I followed my mother's wishes, I pulled out a checkbook. This was prior to the era, the time of credit cards. To avoid U.S. import duties, the items were sent in 5 separate packages, each requiring official certificates of origin, that is, not made in Communist China, and mailed to 5 different relatives at different addresses. As I wrote a check for a little under $100, with all proceeds to benefit the refugees, I felt more like a wealthy philanthropist than a graduate student. Most fascinating to me were the artisans carving ivory, especially the intricate, picturesque scenes on movable balls, one within another. Encouraged by Helen and given the incredibly low prices due to the very strong value of the U.S. dollar, I purchased a dozen gifts for my parents and to beautify my future home. In my naivete, and to my later regret, I thought that these ivory tusks only came from elephants that had died of natural causes. Now, I'm embarrassed to display these works of art and yet unwilling to sell them, even though I can, since they were purchased prior to the U.S. ban on importing ivory to discourage its harmful abuses of a beautiful endangered species. Resembling the life of Mark Twain's book, I was unwillingly an innocent abroad. I would have purchased green and rose-colored jade carvings too, but alas, they were made in mainland China and thus forbidden to bring into the U.S. On that weekend, thanks to Helen and her close friend, I treated them to a dim sum brunch in a crowded second-floor restaurant overlooking the bustling street below. Young girls walked the narrow aisles barely wide enough for their slim frames, and the bamboo box trays they carried were filled with freshly prepared, tempting stuffed dumplings for us to choose from. Varied shapes, sizes, and types of dim sum were displayed in open boxes strapped over the girls' shoulders, akin to the offerings cigarette girls in fancy clubs were seen carrying in the 1930s black and white movies. Speaking of movies, It was in Hong Kong that I became closely connected to a movie star, more specifically, Kirk Douglas. But more about that a little later. My reason for visiting Hong Kong was to prepare for a career as an international student advisor. I wanted to better understand the prior university dorm experiences of the rapidly increasing number of Asian foreign students coming to the U.S. for higher degrees. Additionally, I was preparing myself to advise those Americans who wished to study abroad. More than just theoretical knowledge, I was living my lessons. At the same time that I sought out key informants to interview others, those aware of my presence sought me out. Among them was a young scholar from Dartmouth, one of America's prestigious Ivy League colleges, who found out from others that I was staying at the dorm. There was added interest because during my undergraduate years, I had dated a guy at Dartmouth who had a keen interest in studying abroad. The handsome face of the scholar in Hong Kong, framed in short, sandy blonde curls, tall compared to the Chinese students, and dashing in his Ivy League style of dress, remains in my memory. But his name eludes my recall, so let's call him Danford from Dartmouth. According to Danford's invitation for an evening in Hong Kong, I felt as if a gallant knight met me at the castle perched on this mountain peak. My new friend Helen told the other girls in the dorm about my date, and since dating was not the Chinese custom then, but something only occasionally viewed in American movies, I was both a star and a princess, or more accurately, the source of gossip in the dorm for that evening. Danford treated me to my first hot pot style cooking meal, complete with a small charcoal fire in the center of a punch bowl-sized soup tureen. If you're not familiar with this Chinese cooking bowl, think of a very large angel cake pan, open side up, with a little fire in the center tube. Using cooking chopsticks, we added selected morsels of chopped vegetables, herbs, soy sauce, and meats to the watery broth until it turned into our main dish to enjoy with a dish of rice, of course, rice. The small restaurant was very modest, fit for a student's budget, but fitting for a princess. After a leisurely dinner with lots of getting acquainted talk, he took me to where I would not have wandered alone at night. In the chill March twilight, we joined a crowd gathered around a popular Chinese street opera. Afterward, he took me for a tram ride further up Victoria Peak to a romantic spot by a majestic old tree overlooking all of Hong Kong. Twinkling lights in the darkness masked the blight of millions below. We were in our own world, one so peaceful. He told me the story of the Chinese opera and more tales. Much later, when I was back again in America, I saw that very tree and that romantic place featured in the film Love is a Many-Splendored Thing. At this romantic point, you're probably wondering about my encounter with the famous actor Kirk Douglas. It started with an invitation. As an international exchange student on a travel study program grant from the U.S. government through the East-West Center, I checked in at our American consulate in Hong Kong. The officials there were very welcoming, inviting me to many functions. In addition to invitations at their homes and to another university, Chung Chi in the New Territories, I was taken sightseeing around Hong Kong harbor in a Chinese sampan with colorful sails. We stopped at a floating seafood restaurant where, in lieu of a menu, one pointed to fish swimming in a glass tank to choose one's lunch entree. Also, it so happens that during my 2 weeks in Hong Kong, to promote international understanding, the U.S. Department of State, through the U.S. Information Agency Services, sponsored notable American performing artists, in this case, Kirk Douglas, who was to speak at the University of Hong Kong. I was invited. In a sea of Chinese students' faces seated in that auditorium, I was the only foreigner. During the question and answer period at the end of Mr. Douglas's presentation, I stood up to ask him a question based on a comment from his talk. He had said that just prior to his trip, he had seen the movie The World of Susie Wong, but now, after his arrival, his impressions had changed and he was favorably impressed with this city. To the apparent approval of students in the audience, I commented that movies left strong and lasting impressions and asked him if he was going to share his changed viewpoint of Hong Kong with others. Yes, he said, he definitely would do so. Shortly afterwards, as he walked out of the auditorium, amicably we chatted in general about his visit, the places he had seen in Hong Kong, and where else he would be traveling. It was at this moment the Chinese press photographer photographed the two of us together. I was so engaged in conversation with this charming actor that I did not even notice the photographers. I was more focused on him and navigating the cobblestone streets in high heels. Months later, when I was in Hong Kong again, an American secretary at the consulate gave me a copy of the photo and caption that appeared in the Chinese newspaper, identifying me as Kirk Douglas's wife. For younger readers, yes, Kirk Douglas is the father of movie star Michael Douglas. And no, I've never been identified as his mother. My life as the wife of an illustrious movie star was as short-lived as a walk-on appearance in a film. But little did I know then that my next encounter would be with a celebrity in the athletic world. In fact, a newly proclaimed world champion, a chance meeting that would lead to my staying at his family's home in yet another exotic country. Indeed, I was feeling the dizzying heights of Alice in Wonderland one moment, and then the next I could feel